In the meantime, I want to bring in NBC's David Noriega in Los Angeles. Melanie Zanona is covering Capitol Hill. Retired Army four-star General Barry McCaffrey is an MSNBC military analyst. And with us in the studio, former Pennsylvania Republican Congressman Charlie Dent. He's also the executive director of the congressional program at the Aspen Institute. General, I want to start with you and whether you agree with the decision to send in the Marines or not. You know, the governor says most of them literally don't have anything to do, and he sent this message to the president last night.
Rescind this absurd, illegal, and immoral order. Let our military go home. The absurdity of threatening the people of the United States of America with their own military, our proud military. Mr. President, show some decency, show some humanity. More importantly, act like the commander-in-chief. Stand back, and we'll clean up your mess.
So, General, I want to ask you what you make of the decision to send in the Marines in general, but also, is that decision the president's to make?
Well, look, there's deadly serious political theater going on right now. Trump ran for office saying he was going to close the border, which he has, and he was going to deport 10 million illegal migrants in the United States, crashing the agricultural, construction, service industry, et cetera. It's not even remotely going to happen. It certainly won't happen with due process for millions of people. So what's going on right now is a standoff between a political standoff with tremendous hysteria on both sides on, are we going to support crashing the economy by deporting 10 million people or not? That's really what's at stake. Now, in the short run, 4,000 National Guard federalized is surprising. Bringing in the Marines is surprising. So far, they're not engaged with the demonstrators. They're guarding federal property, which he's fully within authority to do. So I think this is largely a fabricated crisis by both sides.
And Melanie, I want to ask you, that hearing on the Hill with Secretary Hegseth today was supposed to be about the budget. But of course, given the politics the general just mentioned, it was mostly about this. What did we learn about the mobilization of these National Guard units? What authority is being used? Anything else that stood out to you?
Yeah, the secretary was asked about this right out of the gate by Democrat Betty McCollum. She's a Democrat from Minnesota, and she asked the secretary, how much is it going to cost to deploy the troops and deploy these Marines into California? And she also asked whether any other training or critical duties were impacted as a result. But Hegseth did not provide a cost estimate. He did not directly answer the question. And instead, he largely pivoted to attacking Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and how he handled the protests over George Floyd in 2020. Let's watch some of their exchange.
ICE ought to be able to do its job, whether it's Minneapolis or Los Angeles.
I have limited time. I asked a budget
and they
question.
Are being,
Could the secretary please address the budget? Thank you.
You asked about the situation in Los Angeles, and we believe ICE agents should be allowed to be safe in doing their operations, and we have deployed National Guard and the Marines to protect them in the execution of their duties.
And Hegseth was also asked by California Democrat Pete Aguilar about the legal justification for Trump's decision to federalize these National Guard troops into California. Again, he seemed to largely dodge the question itself, but he did offer a forceful defense of the president. No doubt something the president himself might be looking out for later today. But this is just one of several hearings that Hegseth will appear for on Capitol Hill, his first appearance since his testy confirmation battle and since a lot of these controversies that have really marked his tenure as secretary. Christina.
Thanks, Melanie. And turning away from the rhetorical fireworks for just a second, David, I want to ask you, how are things on the street? What are you actually seeing today, and how is it compared to what we've seen the last several days?
Well, look, right now it's quiet. It's still relatively early here. Things don't usually pick up until late morning, early afternoon. But it's tense. A lot of people are expecting the possibility that things might once again, kind of take off as the day proceeds. But I want to talk to you about what happened yesterday, because it was pretty remarkable in one way. The scale and intensity of the law enforcement presence in response to the relatively small and relatively scattered protests that we saw in this downtown area yesterday was completely overwhelming. I have covered protests in a lot of different places over the years, and I had never seen a law enforcement presence like this one, just in terms of how how much it actually pretty substantially outnumbered the protesters themselves. This was law enforcement from the LAPD, from the LA County Sheriffs, from the California Highway Patrol, and from a number of other law enforcement agencies around Southern California. They came out in full force. A show of force is not doing justice to what the police officers did yesterday. Now, in response, I think I have to attribute this to that law enforcement presence. The protests that we saw yesterday were substantially less confrontational, smaller, and more scattered than the ones we saw on Sunday. Sunday, for example, we saw people go down the freeway on-ramps onto the 101, block traffic for an extended period of time. We didn't see anything like that yesterday, in part because police created a pretty much impenetrable barrier between where protesters were gathered and anywhere near the freeway. Ditto most of the federal buildings that are part of the complex that you see behind me right now. Those, by the way, are National Guard vehicles, and I don't know if you can see any of the actual National Guard troops behind me, but they're out there in relatively small numbers because that's where they've been posted for the last, 2 days since they were deployed on Sunday. Now, the question today, I think, looking ahead to the next few hours, is whether the deployment of the Marines will instigate more protests. I spoke to a number of protesters yesterday who told me that they are very unhappy with the fact that Trump is deploying the Marines. They see it as an escalation of this sort of, ongoing confrontation. They see it as a step towards authoritarianism, a step further than the deployment of the National Guard troops already on Sunday. Whether enough protesters come out to sort of escalate the situation back to the level that we saw on Sunday is very much an open question. And I definitely expect that we'll see as big or even more of a deployment of local and state and county law enforcement here in the downtown area, because it's really, at this point, the sort of stakes for Mayor Karen Bass, for Police Chief McDonnell, for Governor Newsom is to show the world and to show the president that they do not need, as they are saying, that they do not need the Marines in the city to control the situation, that they don't even need the National Guard troops that have already been deployed to control the situation. Just last thing I'll say, it's important to remind people the footprint of this activity in downtown LA is quite small. LA is a massive city. We're not seeing anywhere near the kind of unrest that we saw in the 90s or have seen in some instances, after the Dodgers win the World Series. This is a matter of a few blocks in downtown LA. Police have more than enough numbers to control, as we saw yesterday. Again, it depends on how much things escalate, but that's a little bit what the balance is looking like on the ground, Christine.
Thank you, David. And Congressman, you heard him talk about controlling the situation, but I want to ask you about controlling the messaging, because it seems like whereas previous administrations, both Republican and Democrat, would try to avoid conflicts, this is a fight the White House is happy to have. In fact, a White House official tells NBC News, quote, "We are happy to have this fight." And Politico Playbook today is calling it a fight Trump wanted. You've also got the National Review saying, quote, "Trump has no downside here." Do you agree with that?
Well, I tend to agree that Trump does want the fight. And you're right. Most presidents would try to diffuse tensions. Trump likes to accelerate them. He's an accelerant. He loves having this conversation. We're not talking about the economy right now. And the problem, of course, with his opponents is, they're playing right into his hands.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Is he winning this?
Well, I think he is. On a political level, he's winning it. What's so sad about it is that, we should be hearing from state and local law enforcement. If they need the National Guard to be called up, well, they should reach out to the governor or the White House. And the Marines, Posse Comitatus, we have to think about that a little bit. That's clearly an escalation. But right now, I think Trump likes having this debate all day, every day. He loves talking about this, although he could actually claim victory that, the number of illegal border crossings and people abusing the asylum system is way down. He can claim success, but now he just loves having this fight, and he's going to continue doing it as long as everybody's going to keep covering it, because he thinks he's winning. When people are standing out there, some people are throwing things at the police and waving Mexican flags.
Right, that image of the flag on the motorcycle in front that we're going to see over and over and over again.
Yep, you're going to see that, and so Trump's winning with that. And frankly, I think a lot of American people don't like those images either.
General, I want to ask you, as someone who spent your life in the military, we were just talking about Posse Comitatus, which is trying to keep the civilian and military branches of the U.S. government separate. There's an important role soldiers have and are taught to stay out of politics and be loyal to the Constitution, not a person or a party. Do these actions by the president, in your opinion, blur that line? And if so, what are the potential consequences?
Well, I think the underlying principle, both constitutional and sort of the values of America, is we don't want U.S. armed forces involved in domestic law enforcement, period. We don't want them investigating, arresting, gathering evidence. That's the heart and soul of the Posse Comitatus Act. At the same time, a lot of Americans don't understand. 1976, the Presidential Emergency Powers Act, there's some 137 emergency powers granted to the president that he can act on without congressional approval. There's 30 ongoing declared national emergencies that are staying in place. And so certainly, in my view, he has full authority to carry out military operations, for example, to protect federal property. But much of this is political theater. Obviously, the LAPD, a first-rate law enforcement organization, the LA County Sheriff's Department have more than enough manpower to handle the situation. But again, Christina, in the background, are we going to allow the Trump administration to deport 10 million people? Can they even do it? Can they do it with due process in the court system? The answer is no. But this, I think, from a political perspective, is what both President Trump wants and Gavin Newsom here daring federal authorities to arrest him. There's a certain element of political immaturity and risk-taking on both sides.